I stood beneath the string lights outside the old barn where we'd chosen to renew our vows, my heart pounding with anticipation. The night air smelled faintly of pine and hay, familiar scents that reminded me of simpler times when we first fell in love. At 35, I felt every bit the woman I had become after a decade of marriage, a mother, a professional, and a confidant. The guests murmured behind me, champagne glasses sparkling in their hands, as I adjusted the delicate lace trim of my dress. I felt my husband's steady gaze on me, warm and reassuring, in the glow of the vintage Edison bulbs above. He had planned this evening meticulously, hiring a quartet to play our song and arranging the tables with wildflowers my grandmother had cultivated. My breath caught as he stepped forward, coat draped elegantly over one arm, looking every bit as dashing as he had at our original wedding. When he reached me, he slid his arm around my waist and drew me close in a slow, tender embrace. His coat brushed against my arm, and I noticed a slight bulge in the inner pocket that I hadn't observed before. For a fleeting moment, my stomach twisted with curiosity, but I smiled up at him, savoring the comforting weight of his body. We exchanged whispered words, promises renewed and laughter shared, before stepping apart to face our families and friends. His eyes lit up as he opened the small box we'd commissioned, sliding the ring onto my finger once more. I so loved the way the diamond caught the light, but all the while my thoughts drifted back to that coat pocket. Was I imagining it, or had that bulge grown more pronounced since he moved closer? After the ceremony concluded, we moved toward the rustic bar where the bartender raised his bottle in salute. I took a sip of my champagne but set it down hurriedly. At the edge of the weathered wooden counter, quietly, I said to him, "Can I borrow your coat for just a moment? It's colder out here than I expected." He hesitated, brow furrowed, but nodded and shrugged out of the jacket, handing it to me as if trusting my whim. The guests continued to chat and laugh around us, oblivious to the tension knotting my shoulders as I cradled his coat. My fingers traced the seam where the lining met the wool, seeking the pocket, my pulse racing. I slipped my hand inside and felt the smooth leather of a wallet and another object I couldn't yet identify. I resisted the urge to pull them both out at once, and instead extracted the wallet first, turning it over in my palm. His ID and credit cards were neatly organized, exactly how I'd expect, but it was impossible to ignore the unfamiliar bulge below. With deliberate calm, I reached back into that secret compartment and retrieved the second item, a crumpled receipt from an upscale hotel. My breath hitched when I recognized the name and address, a place neither of us had reason to visit. For a moment, I simply stared at the piece of paper, its edges soft from being folded more times than I could count. My mouth went dry as I folded it back into quarters, heart pounding as I realized what this might mean. Should I confront him now, in front of everyone, or wait until later? He dipped his head toward me, concern flickering in his eyes as he noticed my rigid posture and the coat hanging limply in my hands. I swallowed, forcing my expression into one of calm neutrality, a skill I'd honed during countless business presentations. "Everything okay?" he murmured, voice low enough that only I could hear. I forced a soft laugh and wrapped his arm around my fingers, wistfully reminding him how much I loved the jacket. Still, beneath that gentle facade, doubt churned like a storm, threatening to break free at any moment. I slipped the paper receipt into my clutch, telling myself that I needed more time to think, more context before accusing him. I draped the coat back around his shoulders and told him how wonderful he looked, imagining the questions flashing behind his charming smile. As we rejoined our guests, I focused on small talk, asking about travel plans and latest work projects, while I replayed every memory of the past months. I tried to remember if he'd ever mentioned business travel to that city or attending an event at that hotel. Nothing came to mind, only a creeping fear that what I held might signal betrayal rather than an innocent mistake. I watched him laugh with my sister, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the genuine warmth evident in his tone. My own laughter felt forced, ringing shallow in the humid night air, and I struggled to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Finally, under the pretense of retrieving my purse, I slipped away and made my way to the barn's side entrance. Heart hammering, I leaned against the doorframe and flipped the receipt open, tracing the date and time printed in charcoal ink. The date was from 2 weeks ago, the night he told me he had a solo dinner with a client downtown. The total at the bottom exceeded what he normally spent on business necessities by twofold, leaving a stark question unasked and unanswered. My eye stung as I folded the paper back carefully, sliding it into my pocket, steeling myself for whatever confession, explanation, or denial would come next. I pressed my palm to the weathered wood, feeling its rough texture grounding me until I found my composure. My mind whirled with scenarios, an innocent misplacement, a secret surprise, or a hidden indiscretion ravenous enough to devour our trust. The laughter and music filtered through the planks, distant reminders of celebrations I was no longer sure I wanted to join. My gaze drifted back to the coat pocket, empty now, yet still echoing secrets it once held. Taking a deep breath, I stepped back into the light, determined to confront him before the night escaped us both. I felt the weight of the receipt in my pocket like a stone as I re-entered the barn, steadying my breath against the tremor in my hands. The chatter of friends and clinking of glasses buzzed around me, but I moved with deliberate calm, determined not to let suspicion show on my face. My husband caught my eye across the room and offered that warm, familiar smile I had admired for years, the one that usually chased away my worries. I returned the gesture with a slight lift of my glass, praying my lips wouldn't betray the turmoil churning inside. Each step toward him felt heavy, as though I carried both our past trust and the unknown future bundled up in that crumpled hotel receipt. We joined our nearest table, where my college roommate animatedly recounted her own marriage's recent challenges, oblivious to the tension shadowing my thoughts. I nodded and laughed at her anecdotes, commenting on her resilience and offering what support I could, but my mind repeatedly flicked back to the date printed on that paper, the same night he told me he had dinner with a client downtown. I tried to recall whether he described any unusual expenses, but only his casual reassurance came to mind. I chastised myself for not paying closer attention to his business trips. I had trusted him completely until that moment. Now I clung to the hope that there was a harmless explanation waiting just out of reach. When our Vows Renewal photographer beckoned us to recreate the iconic first look pose, I stepped forward alongside my husband, both of us framed by weathered barn doors and strings of Edison bulbs. He draped his arm gently over my waist, the coat brushing lightly against my forearm. I felt the bulge of the receipt through the lining as if it were embedded in my own skin. Smiling for the camera, I channeled the calm facade I'd perfected in boardroom presentations, hiding the rapid beating of my heart. The camera flashed, and I closed my eyes briefly, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew had to come. Once the formal photos wrapped, we drifted toward the corner where soft lantern light created a pocket of intimacy. I turned to him, voice steady but low enough that only he could hear. "There's something we need to talk about." His brow creased in concern as he nodded and murmured, "Of course." Taking a shaky breath, I slipped the receipt from my pocket and unfolded it with deliberate care. His eyes followed the paper in my hand, widening slightly as he recognized the hotel's name. I asked him to walk with me outside, away from prying ears. On the grassy edge of the pasture, fireflies blinked amidst the tall grass, and the warm night breeze carried the scent of hay and wildflowers. I held out the receipt, the paper crackling between us like a barrier of half-truths. "You told me you were at dinner with a client that night," I said, voice steady despite the flood of emotion rising within me. "But this says you stayed at the Grand Oak Hotel afterward, alone." His face went pale, as though the moonlight itself had drained the color from his cheeks. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze for a moment before finally meeting my eyes with raw honesty. "I was ashamed," he admitted quietly. "I messed up, and I didn't know how to bring it up." My pulse thundered then, a thousand questions racing through my mind. Was there someone else? Did this secret hide deeper betrayal? Or was it simply a misstep he regretted more than anything? He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face as if trying to smooth away my doubts. "I took her there," he said, voice catching. "My assistant. She's been going through a hard time, and I didn't want anyone to know. I paid for the room so we could talk without distractions, to figure out how to support her." My breath caught at the explanation, the absurdity and sincerity mingling in my chest. He spoke of sleepless nights worrying about her mental health, of a conversation that stretched until the early hours, and of a panicked moment when he realized he should have told me immediately. I remembered how he had been distant in the weeks leading up to this vow renewal, the late-night calls, the sudden out-of-town justification. Each excuse now replayed in my mind with fresh context. While part of me wanted to believe him absolutely, another part trembled at the thought that trust could so easily fracture. I stood silent as the breeze rustled the grass, caught between relief and lingering doubt. His hand found mine, warmth radiating through my palm as though begging me to close the gap his secrecy had driven between us. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I should have told you." That simple admission, stripped of any defense, struck me deeply. I saw in his eyes the regret of a man who understood he'd wounded the one person he loves most. Despite the ache of betrayal, I felt the pull of compassion, the same force that had drawn me to him years ago. The night around us seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my response. I inhaled, tasting the earthy sweetness of the summer air, and squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you for telling me now," I managed, my heart both heavy and relieved. "I need time to process this." He nodded, relief and sorrow mingling in his expression as if he'd been prepared for rejection, but found grace instead. We stood there in a moment suspended between past mistakes and future possibility, two imperfect souls navigating the fragile aftermath of hidden truths. When we finally returned to the celebration, our steps were slower but synchronized, as though we'd found a new rhythm together. I slipped my hand into his, entwining our fingers, and he draped my coat over my shoulders in a small gesture of care. The barn's warm glow welcomed us back, and the music swelled in encouragement. As I slid into my seat, I realized that despite the secret we'd uncovered, our vow renewal held deeper meaning now, proof that even tested love could find renewal. I raised my glass to him, finding comfort in his steady gaze, ready to continue this story together in honesty and renewed devotion. When I stepped back into the barn that night, the low hum of conversation felt softer and more forgiving than before. The wooden beams overhead glowed a honeyed amber in the lantern light, and the scent of hay mixed with the faint waft of lilac from the vases on the tables. I slid into my seat beside my husband, our elbows touching for the first time since our private conversation. The moment felt like an unspoken apology written in the gentle brush of our arms. Around us the guests resumed their celebrations, yet for a moment I observed everything through a lens of quiet reflection, watching how relationships could fracture and then find their way back to solidity. Our tablemates noticed a subtle shift in my demeanor and raised their glasses in a spontaneous toast. I returned the gesture, forcing a bright smile even as my heart raced with uncertainty. My husband laced his fingers through mine under the table, a promise without words that said he would face whatever came next by my side. In that embrace I found the courage to keep going, to let the night proceed despite the tremors still rippling through my mind. As the quartet struck up a playful tune, I allowed myself to sway in time with the music, grateful for the familiar traditions that still bound us together. Later, when the dance floor opened, my husband led me under the cloth-draped archway where our first dance had begun. The smooth grain of the barn floor felt cool beneath my heels as he pulled me close. I rested my head on his shoulder and inhaled the comforting scent of his cologne mixed with barn dust. For a moment I closed my eyes, surrendering to the music and the warmth of his embrace. The awkwardness of earlier was already fading, replaced by a cautious hope that whatever had been broken could yet be reforged in truth. The next morning, as golden light streamed through our bedroom curtains, I lay awake listening to my husband's even breathing beside me. Outside our window dawn. Chorus sparrows flitted among the maple branches, their song reminding me of new beginnings. I turned to him, tracing the line of his jaw in the soft light, and felt a surge of tenderness for the man who had chosen to confess his mistake rather than bury it forever. I reached for his hand, and when he stirred I simply squeezed, offering my silent acceptance while recognizing that complete trust would take more than one heartfelt apology. Over the following weeks we fell into a new rhythm of openness. He invited me to sit in on his meetings so I could witness the pressures that had driven him to secrecy. I agreed, attending boardroom discussions in downtown Chicago skyscrapers and client dinners where I saw the earnest concern with which he treated his team. One evening, after a long strategy session, he introduced me to his assistant at the Grand Oak Hotel, then an anxious young woman who, with tears in her eyes, thanked me for understanding the weight he'd carried. In that exchange I saw the compassionate core of my husband's character and the genuine need that had catalyzed his ill-conceived private meeting. Despite the revelation of his secret, we discovered new facets of our marriage. We instituted a weekly ritual of journaling together, sharing our fears and frustrations on paper before talking them through. We filled our calendar with twice-monthly date nights where phones were turned off and worries left behind. I learned that trust was not a static monument but a garden requiring constant care, patience, and the occasional replanting. My husband learned to speak his burdens aloud rather than bottling them inside a hidden pocket. Though the memory of that hotel receipt still flickered at the edges of my mind, it became less a weapon and more a lesson etched into our shared story. By the time autumn painted the town in hues of crimson and gold, our vow renewal felt less like a single night ceremony and more like an ongoing journey of rediscovery. We surprised each other with weekend retreats to nearby lake cabins where we kayaked at dawn and roasted marshmallows under a sky swollen with stars. The crisp air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and each evening by the fire we would talk about dreams for our children's future, the charities we wanted to support, and the chapters of life yet unwritten. Our conversations flowed easily now, tinted with laughter and mutual respect born from vulnerability. When our anniversary arrived, 9 months after the renewal, we hosted a small gathering at our backyard patio. Strings of globe lights crisscrossed overhead, and the fire pit crackled as friends gathered to toast us once more. As I raised my glass and caught my husband's eye, I felt an immense gratitude for every twist our story had taken. The moment was suffused with warmth and reflection. I realized that the coat pocket held more than just a receipt, it had contained a turning point, a pivot on which our marriage swung from untested faith into a deeper, more resilient bond. I took my husband's hand, let the light of the fire dance over our joined fingers, and whispered, "Thank you for coming back to me." He smiled, squeezing my hand in return, and replied softly, "Thank you for believing we could." In that sacred exchange our vows found their truest form, not in perfect ignorance but in the courageous act of facing flaws together. The guests cheered, the night air rang with laughter, and I knew that our love had passed through trial by fire and emerged all the stronger for it. Standing there among dear friends under the starbright sky, I understood that marriage was not a promise of unbroken perfection but a pledge to stand firm when the ground shifted beneath us. And as I rested my head on my husband's shoulder once more, feeling the steady beating of his heart in sync with mine, I felt certain that no receipt, no secret, could ever sever the bond we had reforged with honesty, compassion, and unwavering devotion.